All right, so is $1 million enough to retire? I hate the question, but I'm going to answer for you anyway. And the answer is yes and no. We'll talk about that in the video. We'll talk about the role of time and the role of income in deciding on whether or not it's actually enough. But I'm going to show it to you in a way that's a lot more specific. And if you watch my channel enough, you'll know that's exactly what this is about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Before I give you specific examples of $1 million applying to different people, I want to help you understand wealth in a different way than maybe you have in the past. So it's pretty common for people to want to compare themselves to their peers, right? Whether it's your friends, your neighbors, siblings, those types of things. And a lot of times I think, unfortunately, they do it out of context. When most people think of wealth, they think of wealth in terms of financial assets. So let's say, just to oversimplify it, 401ks, bank accounts, right? But there's a little bit different component of this that a lot of people miss, and that's income. You know, I grew up and have worked a lot of my career with people who tend to be less rich from an asset perspective, lower 401k balances, but much richer in terms of income. So teachers and railroaders specifically, that's two groups of people that generally speaking have pensions, but maybe not as much in 401ks. And unfortunately, some of them think of themselves as less wealthy, when in fact, they're probably a lot better off on a relative basis than they think they are. I'm just gonna give you a couple of examples so that you can think about this in a way that's better rounded. So let's say you've got a pension and it's $36,000 a year. What I want you to do is think of what would the equivalent balance be if you had that in financial assets. So let's say you're somebody that's gonna live 35 or 40 years after you start taking your pension, which actually happens with a lot of teachers in Nebraska because they can retire in their mid-50s. $36,000 a year, if you can only withdraw 4% of it for the entire life of the account, you'd have to start with about $900,000 a year to have the equivalent of $36,000 a year of income. Let's say you start a little bit later and you could do a more aggressive 6% withdrawal rate. Well, in that case, you've got about $600,000. And then in the event of, like a lot of pensions where the effective withdrawal rate would be much higher, let's say it's 8%, you still have about $450,000. So a lot of people, like I said, would think of me as somebody with a $36,000 a year pension as poor, and my neighbor with $900,000 a year in a 401k as rich, when in reality, those two people are sitting on pretty equal footing if you understand it in the total context. So the other thing that you should know is you can do the same thing for Social Security. A lot of people don't want me to put Social Security in financial plans. Some of that is based on legitimate concerns over the amount of debt the country has. A lot of it is just political quackery, fear-mongering, all those types of things where we scare people into thinking that they'll never have any Social Security or it's politically motivated. It doesn't matter. Social Security is worth a lot in your retirement. And if you want to know from a previous video, and I'll insert that here, you know, how much of Social Security replaces, it depends a lot on your family situation, but if you're going to cut to the chase, it replaces a lot more as a percentage of income if you're on the lower end. So I'm going to go and start talking about how we actually figure out how much money we need in retirement, and then explain how that relates to whether or not $1 million is enough. So in order to figure out what we need for retirement, it's pretty simple. How much income do we need, and how much income do we already have? That's the gap, right? So if I need $64,000 a year in income and I have $36,000 a year in Social Security, I need to fill a $28,000 gap. That's pretty simple, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. And once I know I need to fill that gap, how much money do I need to fund that level of income? So it's pretty common online for people to see the 4% rule as advice. The 4% rule means in the first year of retirement, you can take out 4% of the initial account balance and inflate that over time. And that's an okay rule, but frankly, for a lot of people, it's trash. And just to blindly follow it puts a lot of people in a worse spot than they would be if they're a little better educated. So I'm gonna give you examples of two couples. The first couple made $80,000 a year pre-retirement and wants to live off of 80% of that. So $64,000 a year net in retirement, okay? The second couple is going to be a little wealthier from an income perspective. So they're going to live off $200,000 a year gross in their working years, and they're going to retire on about $160,000 a year net. And I'm going to have them retiring at two separate times, at 65 and 70, because that impacts your Social Security. And I'm also going to have them living to different ages. The one couple is going to retire at 65 and live to 95, so they got a long time frame, 30 years of retirement. And the second couple is going to retire at 70 and they're only going to live to 85, which is actually pretty close to life expectancy for most people in the US. That obviously is half that time frame from a retirement perspective. I'm going to show you what impact that has. So in the example of the first couple who lived off $80,000 a year and wants $64,000 a year net in retirement, what we'll see here is if they have $1 million, this is what their Social Security looks like. So at 65, it's about $36,000 a year, and at 70, it's about $52,000 a year, which is in line with what we know about Social Security. You would expect about a 40% increase over 5 years if you waited, right? So at $36,000 a year, you can see they got to fill about a $28,000 a year gap plus some taxes. That couple's got virtually no chance of running out of money over that kind of time frame if they have $1 million saved. All right, they have an 80% or better chance of making it if they lived off $82,000 a year net, which is more net money than they had gross income prior to retirement. All right, now if we go to the next example couple that retired at 70 and we only expect them to live at 85, it's pretty obvious that the first couple made it over 30 years. We're gonna make it over the second example, right? But what's interesting is that couple, because their Social Security is so high, only has to spend about $6,700 in the first year to meet their net income goal, which is a 0.67% withdrawal rate, all right? They could actually have spent something like $123,000 net total, that includes Social Security, and had an 80% chance or better of making it, which would have meant in retirement, they'd have 50% more net income than they had gross income prior to retirement. So you can see if you're retiring a little bit later on a shorter time frame, $1 million for somebody in that scenario is a boatload of money. It's significant, right? But let's take this to the next scenario. Let's take this to the higher income couple and see how they fare. So the higher income couple, if we're gonna look at the group that retires at 65 and 70, they're gonna have at those ages $56,000 and $76,000 a year in Social Security respectively. So the first couple that's gonna have a longer time frame, they've got almost no chance of making it with $1 million over that time frame. And in fact, to have an 80% or better chance of making it, they'd actually only be able to spend about $100,000 a year net income in retirement, which is almost 40% shy of their goal. The couple that retired at 70 and is going to live to 85, they've got a shorter time frame, so they've got a chance. So you're saying there's a chance. They've got a chance, about a 21% chance of making it on $160,000 a year. If they want to have an 80% or better chance, they're going to have to lower their income about 10% to $144,000 a year net. Still a substantial amount of money, but shy of their goal. And so what's the point of all this, right? The point of all this is using round numbers in your financial planning doesn't work. And in fact, it can harm you in a lot of different ways. The second point is comparing yourself to people financially when you don't know apples to apples what your situation versus theirs is can do you a lot of harm, and it can also lead you to missing the point, right? You have to build your financial plan based on your own needs financially and otherwise, especially including your time frame. And the other thing is if you limit yourself to rules of thumb, a lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to artificially impoverish yourself based sheerly out of your own ignorance. So learn how this stuff works. Learn how time frames matter. Learn how Social Security matters. Learn how other income sources matter. And don't think of wealth in a very one-dimensional and overly simplistic way. And if you like this, like the video below, comment, subscribe, and tell me some of the things that keep you up at night, or maybe some of the things about personal finance that you don't understand that you'd like to know a little bit more about.